Hi and welcome to the fourth in a short series of vlogs relating to the announcements made by Blizzard on a number of topics concerning Legion at Gamescom recently. So we've covered mechanics development, loot, legendary items, and today we're going to take a look at class development. Please note that I don't need any visuals for this vlog, so you can think of it more as a podcast and just listen while you browse other websites, or even just get more Legion invasions done in-game. The first thing relates to hotfixes. Blizzard have really developed the technology to hotfix abilities, including updates to tooltips which used to require a patch. However, they felt that they sprang a change to the assassination rogue ability, Exsanguate, and that it wasn't communicated well. They announced that in future they would communicate fixes of this nature to the player base in advance, even if it means delaying the actual hotfix to do so. They have categorically said that you won't find yourself having something sneakily hotfixed like this in the middle of a raid, for example. And one issue players might have, and I'm thinking especially in terms of DPS players with more than one DPS spec, and definitely if they're a pure class with access to 3, is that you might work on one artifact because, you know, for the spec it's clearly ahead of the others for the content you'll be doing. Then during a tuning period, which remember doesn't just happen before launch or for patches, but is an ongoing process throughout an expansion, you might find it heavily nerfed and you've got yourself 2 months development on an artifact for what is now the worst spec. Well, worry ye not. Blizzard said that they wouldn't tune specs into a different order of strength. The specific example they gave was that if fire mages are really overpowered, imagine such a world, then they would scale them back a bit, sure, but they'd still be overpowered when they finished, just by not such a large margin. They specifically said that you shouldn't regret what you spent your artifact power on, though I guess the proviso there is they assume you did your research at least and made sure you had the most up-to-date information on your specs at launch. Now, we couldn't talk about classes without the old melee versus range debate, and sure enough this was brought up. Blizzard stated their view that melee are better for dungeons because of superior cleave, especially on the move. Now, whilst this may be true if you're really dragging things along at great distance, this isn't how the challenging Mythic Plus dungeons are going to work. You're against a timer, but the whole point of these is that you level up to a point where the dungeons represent a major challenge. Under these circumstances, you don't chain pull. Look at any number of advanced Mythic Plus dungeons on YouTube and see how brutal they can get. Sure, some raiders will gear up to the point where they can beast the content perhaps, but that's nowhere near the majority of people accessing Mythic Plus. The point is that even when trash is being moved a bit, the range don't have to move themselves unless it's dragged out of range. Also, and I can't speak from recent experience, but when I was a healer, I often didn't fancy full melee groups in the tougher dungeons. This is because of cleave and similar AoE effects around the target that would cause real trouble for melee DPS, but not for ranged, unless their positioning was bad. So although I'm not going to discount what they say out of hand, and having good cleave is definitely going to be wanted in lots of cases, I think healers would have raised an eyebrow at this statement. Swinging the other way, they acknowledge that ranged are stronger in raids. They said they're fine with this as long as the gap isn't too big. I'm not sure what they would consider to be too big a gap, however. They also said they don't want to add in mechanics that simply don't target melee in order to address this. Well, this is exactly what they have been doing for years, including the most recent live boss, Archimond, having such mechanics. Let's face it, on almost all fights you'd ideally just take a group of range for any group PvE. The only thing you can do to shift the balance towards melee is make them immune to certain mechanics, as I've just said, that are a pain in the ass for ranged, to give melee useful abilities to do when countering mechanics, though interrupt rotations seem to be all they have in that regard, to have heavy movement periods but still on the same target, etc. I'd say the only way to naturally rebalance melee would be to remove cluster or targeted AoE ground effects and give everyone a charge mobility with 0 cooldown, and neither of those things is sensible. Added into this mix was the statement that they believe the community sometimes have perceptions of inadequacy by seeing one thing being 1% better and believing it's the only viable solution. Now, as a long-suffering ret, I'm going to back them up on this one. Not an expansion has gone by where I haven't felt judging eyes wondering why there's a ret in their raid, and yet there I am at the very least topping the middle pack damage and even completely topping damage on first kills now and then. Hopefully the same will be true of Legion. But those perceptions will still exist. That being said, I don't think Blizzard absolving themselves of blame is very helpful. What are they doing to dispel these perceptions? I have to cope with misconceptions all the time from my students in my job. The word can't is used far too much when I give them some challenge. But I can't just give up on them and blame their parenting or earlier schooling. It's my job to get them to overcome false barriers, even though it's not my fault they even exist. Now on to ability pruning, another trigger for some people. This has divided opinion somewhat, which is at least not as controversial as implementing something that nobody appreciated. Camera distance. Oh, excuse me. Their statement was that you prune a plant to guide its growth. But my response to this was, no, you prune a plant to smash it into the ground and teach it who's boss. Bloody plants trying to block my windows. Now, I'm personally neutral to this, really. I've played Elder Scrolls Online where you have to choose a very small number of abilities to be able to use, and I was fine with that. That being said, it's not so much the number, but if a class feels that they lost an ability that was a core part of how they used to play, then I can well understand the anxiety. People play a class or spec for a number of reasons. One of those reasons might well be they enjoyed the playstyle. Now, when you radically change that playstyle, you effectively leave such a player in a position where they either have to change away from a character they may have years worth of development in, or play a spec that, just to them at least, now just feels a bit crap. All I'll say on this one is it's a bold move that can easily backfire. Time will tell if it works or if it becomes one of those things they say they got wrong when they start talking about the next expansion. They did add to their statement the idea it's removing stuff to add new stuff. But I have always been baffled at why they feel the need to keep making changes to specs each expansion. It's now an expected thing, but why? I prefer a philosophy of aiming to keep specs playing the same in regards to what works and only altering what doesn't. Because another aspect of pruning, if you want to liken it to plants, is you're cutting away a few branches but keeping most of it intact. Legion has been a slash and burn for a lot of specs. Naturally, the issue of homogenization came up. This is the dirty word used to justify removing tools that players need. However, giving everyone an ability option isn't homogenization any more than giving them all a Hearthstone is. There are just some things in the game everybody needs, and the way to separate the classes is to do it in different ways. Going back to the melee issue, I would say all melee need mobility options because you can't just position yourself somewhere relatively safe like ranged can. This means you sometimes need to move away from targets, and that means doing 0 DPS at this time until you either make a switch or move back to your target. They also benefit from short cooldown defensive abilities because of the aforementioned ground AoE. Often it splashes and hurts raids with a large number of melee. Oh, and let's force 50% of all classes to be in melee as DPS, but only 25% be ranged. That'll help ease the overrepresentation of melee. While we're about it, whenever we introduce a new class, let's force them to be melee. Seriously, we've had 3 new classes now, and not a single one has a ranged DPS option. But what is it that all melee have in common? The 15-second interrupt, which makes them suitable for interrupt rotations. But the only reason these mechanics even exist is to give melee something to feel useful for, and even then, you often don't need that many in it, and relatively few bosses even have them. Another statement used was, in a world where no one has weaknesses, there are also no strengths. Sounds like a bloody good world to me. Did the International Olympics Committee see that Usain Bolt is able to cover massive distances with each stride, and so make him start further back to add a weakness to his strength? No. Did they do something similar to all the drugs treats, but otherwise let them compete anyway? No, they didn't, because it's inherently unsporting. Sport wants a level playing field, and may the better player win. And then this leads on to my final issue. They actually have now gone on record as saying they want to move away from bring the player, not the class. Seriously, they actually said that. The example that they used is they want a raid leader to say, right, I want a hunter to fill this last raid spot. Not just a good DPS, not even just a good ranged DPS. No, I specifically want a hunter. At this point, I don't even know what to say. In theory, I could say that what they're talking about is having a nice balance in the raid of all classes, but although this is theoretically possible in normal and heroic, most guild raids are only about half this size, and pugs, which often do want to fill it out, would have to spend more time filling the raid with this restriction. Also, it's physically impossible in Mythic where the numbers of class roll combinations massively outstrips the number of spots in a raid. But I covered that in another video linked here. So with that, and before my incredulity levels reach fever pitch, I think I'm going to leave it there. Tomorrow I'll be running the final part, which will be on the road to raiding. I hope you found it interesting as always. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share. And until next time, I'll see you later.